Welcome back everyone to Genshin Interact. We'll be taking a look at the second half of the 4.3 banners today. First looking into the Electro Archon, Raiden Shogun, as she gets another rerun, and then onto Yoimiya for another rerun stuck in between some great characters yet again. Let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not they are a good pulling option for you.
If you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in. We also do have a Discord you can join where our members can talk with each other and also talk with us. Looking into these banners and possibly pulling for them, the question still remains, are they for you?
The first character we are going to be looking at is Raiden Shogun, obviously the Electro Archon, and first and foremost, like we normally do, looking into her team function, kind of where she fits in a team. The first place that we really see her fit in is that she's going to be an on-field Electro DPS. Seeing a lot of different teams built with her is, obviously as the main Electro driver for just straight Electro damage, putting either some sort of iridescent person with her to get some more shred, some Bennett's, or just some people to buff personally her own specific damage. She does have some off-field help, which we'll talk about in her skill, that can actually be used for some quick swap teams with some other characters, especially some Dendro characters like Tainari. And then in general, she has some great abilities with her team function of just being an energy battery for her entire team when she's in her burst. So a great character all around and has a lot of positives to it. Now, but looking a little bit further besides just her team function, where she is in a team, how about, Rift, if you could go into kind of her ascension and then looking into her actual kit with her normal attack?
Yeah, of course. So looking right at her kit, she ascends into energy recharge, and we're going to find out how this is very, very helpful for her, because not only is it going to be great for getting burst back, because she is a very expensive burst cost of 90, but also it's how she kind of deals damage. She has a passive we'll talk about later that kind of talks about that. But looking at her normal attack, there's nothing really special to attach to this, but moving on to the skill, this is called Transcendence Baleful Omen. And when she uses this, she will unveil a shard of her Yoimiya, dealing electro damage to nearby opponents and granting nearby party members the Eye of Stormy Judgment. Now, what this Eye of Stormy Judgment does, it states that when characters with this buff attack and deal damage to opponents, the Eye will unleash a coordinated attack, dealing AoE electro damage at the opponent's position. Characters who gain the Eye of Stormy Judgment will have their elemental burst damage increased based on the energy cost of the elemental burst during the Eye's duration. The Eye can initiate one coordinated attack every 0.9 seconds. Also, coordinated attacks generated by characters not controlled by you deal 20% of the normal damage.
Now, besides looking at her normal attack and her skill, we're going to be talking about her burst. The Raiden Shogun unleashes the Muso no Hidotachi and deals AoE electro damage, using the Muso Ishin in combat for a certain duration afterwards. The damage dealt by Muso no Hidotachi and Muso Ishin's attacks will be increased based on the number of Chakra Desideratas resolve stacks consumed when this skill is used. Looking further at those Muso Ishin attacks, basically at the Muso no Hidotachi is that big immediate hit that you're going to be getting, and then the Muso Ishin is basically going to be an electro infusion that you're going to get on Raiden's weapon, and you'll be able to do multiple attacks with it afterwards. So looking at those Muso Ishin attacks, while in this state, the Raiden Shogun wields her Tachi in battle, while her normal charge and plunging attacks will be infused with electro damage, and this infusion cannot be overridden. When such attacks hit opponents, she will generate energy for all nearby party members, which is exactly what we were talking about earlier when she gives energy for all of the teammates. Energy can be restored this way once every 1 second, and this effect can be triggered 5 times throughout the skill's duration. While in this state as well, the Raiden Shogun's resistance to interruption is increased, and she's immune to electro-charged reaction damage, making it a lot smoother for combat. While Muso Ishin is active, the Raiden Shogun's normal charge and plunging attacks will be considered elemental burst damage, so make sure that if you are trying to go heavily into her burst damage like you should be, make sure that you're not actually increasing her normal attack talent extremely high, just because this makes sure that most of her damage is coming from her elemental burst damage and nothing really from her normal attacks. Looking at those Chakra Desiderata stacks, when nearby party members, obviously not including the Raiden Shogun herself, use their elemental bursts, the Raiden Shogun will build up resolve stacks based on the energy cost of these elemental bursts. Looking beyond after the Raiden Shogun, sadly we get Yoimiya, who seems to always be stuck in between some really great characters, but let's look at her team function and her playstyle and how she really has her kit really rolling around her. She is going to be an on-field pyro DPS that focuses heavily on normal attacks and actually does really well on with characters like Xingqiu and Yelan to actually help her do more vaporized damage. And a lot of people are talking about how she can kind of push up and actually do a lot of different things and can be great for different scenarios. Looking further into her kit, Rift, what can you tell us?
Well, looking right at her playstyle, she ascends into crit rate, which is great for a main DPS unit, because this is going to allow you to maybe go after a crit damage circlet. Her weapon's also a crit damage weapon, which we'll talk about later. So that's just a very good thing to ascend into. And the normal attack is called Firework Flare Up. And this actually will have a big impact on Yoimiya's damage, as we'll find out later through talking about her skill. But the charge attack isn't too special. You can use it, and while aiming, flames will accumulate around the arrowhead before being fired off as an attack. And this does have different effects based on how long the energy has been charged. So she has a charge level 1 and a charge level 2. So at charge level 1, she'll just fire off a regular flaming arrow that deals pyro damage, just like normal. But at charge level 2, she will generate a maximum of these 3 kindling arrows that you'll kind of see form around the middle arrow shot. And based on the time spent charging, she'll kind of release them as part of this regular aim shot. And these kindling arrows will home in on the nearby opponents, dealing pyro damage on hit. Now, while that's cool and all, that's not really the main part of her kit. The main part of her kit is dealing normal attack damage. So you do want to upgrade the normal attack skill on Yoimiya, because it's going to greatly impact how much damage you deal. And that's why when we look at her skill now, called Niwabi Fire Dance, this is basically going to increase that. So when you use her skill, you get what's called Niwabi Ensho, and during this time, the arrows fired by Yoimiya's normal attack will be blazing arrows, and their damage will be increased and converted to pyro damage. During this time, normal attack Firework Flare Up will not generate kindling arrows at charge level 2. So just like I was saying earlier, it really focuses and hones in on doing normal attacks.
After her normal attack and her skill, something that I think a lot of people overlook, but it's really not necessary for her to really level up, is her burst, and it is called Ryukin Sacrifice. Yoimiya leaps into the air, and she will then fire forth blazing rockets, bursting with surprises that deal AoE pyro damage and mark one of the hit opponents with Aurous Blaze. Aurous Blaze states that all normal, charged, and plunging attacks, elemental skills, and elemental bursts by any party member other than Yoimiya that hit an opponent marked by Aurous Blaze will trigger an explosion dealing AoE pyro damage. When an opponent affected by Aurous Blaze is defeated before its duration expires, the effect will pass on to the nearest and nearby opponent, who will inherit the remaining duration. Now looking at the weapon banner and looking beyond the actual characters themselves, we're actually going to be taking a look at Engulfing Lightning, which is going to be Raiden Shogun's personal weapon. This has a main stat of 55.1% energy recharge at level 90, and we will be talking about the abilities on both weapons at Refinement 1. This weapon increases attack by 28% of energy recharge over the base 100%. So basically, if let's say you have 200% energy recharge on your character overall, you will be taking 28% of 100, because 200 minus 100 is 100. Or if you have 180, you will be taking 28% of the 80%, and that will be the attack percent increase you will get on Raiden. You can gain a maximum bonus of 80% attack this way, and gain 30% energy recharge for 12 seconds after using an elemental burst, which we know is going to be very good, considering that's just going to be helping even more damage for her Musou Ishin attacks, as well as more energy for the entire team. Looking at the characters that it's going to be best on, obviously it's going to be Raiden Shogun's personal weapon, so it's going to be her best in-slot weapon. Xiangling is another character that a lot of people will use this on. Even if you don't have Raiden Shogun, a lot of people can actually, if they lose the 50-50, especially with this weapon banner, they will still probably throw it on their Xiangling, and it does great for her. Another character that a lot of people have been talking about putting it on is Shenhe, because if you run a lot of energy recharge on her to get her burst back for her being a support, you can get a bunch of attack this way by just using your burst, so that's another great thing to look at, as well as Yunjin is another character just because of the high energy recharge stat, and Candace is yet another character that a lot of people can maybe try to use in a specific type of build. It's probably her second best weapon, but it does tend to be pretty good for people that want to use it for basically just a burst support character.
Now looking at the other side of the weapon banner, Thundering Pulse. And this has a main stat, like I was mentioning earlier, of crit damage, and it's going to be 66.2% at level 90. Now looking at the ability, once again assuming it's Refinement 1, it'll flat out increase your attack by 20% and grant the Might of the Thunder Emblem. At stacks level 1, 2, or 3, the Thunder Emblem increases normal attack damage by 12% for that level 1 stack, 24% at stack level 2, and 40% at the 3rd stack. The character will obtain 1 stack of these Thunder Emblems in each of the following scenarios. A, either your normal attack deals damage, and the stack lasts for 5 seconds when you do that. Or B, you cast an elemental skill, and the stack will last 10 seconds if it's through that way. And C, energy is less than 100%. And this stack disappears just when your energy is full. So as long as your burst isn't full, you have this guaranteed stack. Each of these stacks' duration is calculated independently, so do keep that in mind. Some of the best characters for this weapon, obviously Yoimiya, as it is her weapon, but being, a great weapon with just a main set of crit damage, flat out some attack bonuses, and just normal attack increases, it's also really good for characters like Child, and also even Linny, just because of the crit damage. And yes, you could use this on a lot of 4-star bow characters as well if you just want the high base attack and crit stat. So I can see a lot of people going that route, maybe throwing it on Official, Kujo Sara, they do like attack anyways, so you definitely can't go wrong doing that.
Now we're going to be talking about our pulling options and really wrapping up our summary of the different characters and looking beyond their kits and talking about specific accounts. So the first question we like to ask is, do you need either character on your account, and what element or roles is your account in need of? First, looking at Raiden, she is one of the best DPS characters in the game right now, and that is pretty evident, I would say, with most people, and she has such great heavy on-field and off-field electro application that she can, once again, like I was talking about at the very beginning, can be used on multiple different teams. Talking about that main electro team, and even at the beginning, I know a long time ago, using a Raiden, a Yaimiko, a Kazuha, and a Bennett was the best kind of team that you could really have, just because of the damage output you would get. Now, Yaimiko wasn't really helping necessarily anything to do with Raiden except the electro resonance, but her damage output for the entire team was just great to have. Not only that, Raiden's just really good in general to really help with energy benefits for the entire team, is even if she's just a quick swap type idea where you're using her with Tighnari, her skill can hit those electro hits constantly off field while Tighnari is doing his charge attacks, and he has homing missiles, and those are constantly hitting with electro, with the dendro, creating that quicken, and can actually help both of their damage just do more. So Raiden's just a great character, and I think that most people should be kind of focusing on getting her at some point in what they're doing with the game. Yoimiya, on the other hand, is a great on-field pyro DPS that works really well with 4-star weapons and 4-star characters as supports, but the great thing that I think she has going for her is that she's not super dependent on her burst. She does have some things that she can use in her burst that are very nice, but specifically her skill and her normal attack are great, and she is a bow character that focuses on her normal attacks. Very interestingly, it's not very similar to some other bow characters that maybe focus on normal attacks. So I think it's really, really cool of what she can do, a little bit different than everyone else.
So looking right at the next question we have is, do you have the resources to properly invest into the characters that you pull? And while this may not seem like a very important question, to some maybe newer players, it can be something to think about. I know, I've been playing the game recently, and recently I've been encountering some issues with upgrading some weapons just because I'm trying to build everyone. And so I've hit this roadblock in a sense where I'm just waiting to get enhancement ores as they come to me. So my weapons are sitting at level 72 and then 73, 74. So it is, it's something that you could encounter. You may very well not ever encounter that, but if you play the game a lot and you build a lot of things, it definitely can be something you need to think about and kind of prioritize different things and how you build your characters in a certain order or whatnot. But both of these characters being Inazuman characters, they're both going to take Inazuman materials. And the biggest thing is to note that, especially if you are that newer player, this is a story-locked area if you haven't done the Mondstadt and Liyue Archon quests. So if you're still working on those, you may want to get through those, especially if you're considering these characters or any other Inazuman characters for that matter, just so you can get over there to Inazuma on your own and farm the materials on your own. Now, yes, you can join other players' worlds and ask for their materials because they might have Inazuma unlocked, and that's perfectly fine. Just make sure you ask them first, of course. So, but I just know that farming in your own world is usually just less of a hassle, at least for me personally. So, it's, again, not too big of an ordeal, but just something to keep in mind.
The next question we have is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? Raiden really, like I was talking about before, talks about that electro damage team with supports that make Raiden do more damage, and she's really good for that quick swap team, especially with those quicken teams with Tainari and other different characters. So maybe try to keep that in mind with her off-field and on-field usability. I think it's really, really good. Yoimiya focuses more on vaporized teams that seem like that's her real only way to go right now, but someone like Hu Tao would probably be the better choice for these types of teams anyways. Yoimiya really is always going to be second in terms of a vaporized team for someone like Hu Tao, just because of how well Hu Tao really just fits really well with her damage and whatnot if you're trying to go for the best character in that slot. The next area we are going to be talking about is weighing the dangers from, different types of free-to-play players, obviously to veteran players and whales and whatnot, everyone across the board, and looking at their accounts. These types of questions we're going to be talking about are for the people who are generally looking for help on whether or not they should pull one of these characters in this upcoming banner. At the end of the day, though, they are your hard-earned primos, so you decide on how you want to spend them, and this is more or less just a guide on what we think that you guys should do if you fall into this bracket.
So looking right at free-to-play players, these players typically need characters that slot in a lot of different teams that make the game easier before the late game content starts to kick in. Now looking at Raiden, she is one of the few characters in the game that we think all levels of players should think about pulling. So throughout each section, we're just going to say, at the end of the day, you probably should pull Raiden just because she has so much value. It's not even funny. She's just a great DPS. She can be played as a support. She's a universal battery, and the list just goes on and on. She buffs burst damage. Yeah, it just goes on and on. So you should at least consider pulling Raiden at any level of the game, really. Yoimiya, on the other hand, is a great character that can work well with 4-star supports. I know, Vixen, you were talking about that earlier. So she is very easy, especially for a new player, because it's easy to, buff her with some 4 stars, and even the 4-star weapons are great options for her. But if you are looking for a pyro DPS, just keep in mind that Hu Tao is normally referred to as the better vaporized DPS. And there is also Arlecchino that will be coming around in 4.6, so I think that's just something to keep in mind. She may trump both of them, you never know. So with her first appearance coming in later versions, that's once again, keep in mind, and who knows if Lenny's getting a rerun soon, because we had him at the beginning of Fontaine. So I imagine his rerun will be either late Fontaine or right at the beginning of Natlan. So just a lot of things to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, Yoimiya is, I think, a great character for even a new player to pull. She can dish out some really good damage.
Looking at veteran spenders and veteran free-to-play players, you already basically, like we talk about, have 2 4-man teams that have already been running in the Spiral Abyss, and most likely, especially you veterans, should have multiple teams at that to make sure that you can clear the Abyss pretty well. Even if you have someone like Catching and or Sino at this point, Raiden is still a very good pulling option and is very difficult to pass up on her reruns. Like Riff was talking about, every single one of these we're going to tell you to basically it's a very good idea to pull Raiden. A lot of people are talking about how, for instance, Nervalette is the best DPS in the game, and why I say you shouldn't skip on him, you also shouldn't be skipping on Raiden if you have the ability to pull her. She's just a great character. She has a great 4-star weapon in the catch, and it's a free weapon that you can get from fishing, so there's just so much ability to really go after it. It's really not that, shouldn't really be too much of a problem to really go after her, unless obviously you're just starving for primos at this point. Yoimiya is a fun character that could be a lot of use to a lot of different people, even if you have someone like Hu Tao, who's already a great vaporized DPS, or if you already have like Lenny, who's a great just straight pyro character, and even looking at in the future at Arlecchino and what she can bring to the table. But she'll most likely always be, talking specifically about Yoimiya, she'll most likely always be the second best to Hu Tao, and really not a necessity for most accounts, just because of what she can bring to the table is very similar to what other characters can do, and they usually do it better.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, kind of back to free-to-play players, I was going to say, I didn't mention this earlier, but when comparing to Hu Tao, it's not like one is specifically better than the other. One is definitely better when invested into. So like Hu Tao needs a lot of attention, like pulling her weapon, and also assuming you have her first constellation. That's really when she outdoes Yoimiya altogether. So I know comparing the two can be a little controversial because Yoimiya doesn't really require constellations at all to just be a solid character. And yes, Hu Tao you can say the same thing for. She doesn't require constellations to just do really good damage. She's still going to do a lot. It's just, I know there is that, stamina issue with Hu Tao. So again, that is a thing to think about. So honestly, that's why personally, I don't know about you, Vixen, but I think either one is okay. It's like which one you want more, because both at the end of the day are going to clear the abyss for you. So it's whatever character you would rather pull, honestly, whether it's playstyle or even just personality in the characters. So I don't think it's a huge ordeal at the end of the day. But now we're going to look at high spenders and whales. So for you kind of people, we already know you probably pull every character, and that's not a bad thing. That's, if anything, that sounds like a lot of fun, and I wish I could do the same thing. But for you guys, looking into what constellations will benefit your characters is going to be the most helpful thing for you. And as a general rule, most good constellations, other than a C6 of course, are going to be that very first constellation and the second constellation for a majority of characters in the game. So looking at Raiden, her best early constellation, as many people know, is her second constellation. And this constellation states that while using her burst and in the Musou Ishin state right after that first initial hit, the Raiden Shogun's attacks ignore 60% of opponent's defense. So obviously that's just a major, just crazy damage increase for her personal damage. It's almost more than double what you would already be doing. So if you're already doing, say, 20,000 to 30,000 damage in Raiden's burst and you have her C0, when you get her Constellation 2, that'll jump it all the way up to like 50 to 60k. Now looking at Yoimiya, the best early constellation also seems to be her second constellation, and this constellation states that when Yoimiya's pyro damage scores a crit hit, Yoimiya will gain a 25% pyro damage bonus for 6 seconds. This effect can be triggered even when Yoimiya is not the active character. So that is kind of a nice little touch there, meaning the burst can also get benefit out of this, especially while you're going, setting up rotation again with your other supports. Usually I think that's when most people use the burst for Yoimiya, because it specifically deals those explosive AoE pyro hits when you deal damage with the other off-field characters. So it's kind of something you do when you're setting up to get back to her Yoimiya, that is, and use your skill and go into those normal attacks. So it's just a solid 25% pyro damage bonus at the end of the day, and it seems like you can have a really easy time of it keeping the uptime on that, because it's just when you score a crit hit, you'll have it for 6 seconds, and I imagine you get at least another crit hit within the next 6 seconds.
The last question we do look at is, do you need the weapons? Engulfing is a great weapon for Raiden or, Xiangling or some of the other characters we were talking about, but specifically Xiangling is free from the abyss, so that's always a great positive, and both sides of this banner are really solid. So even if you're maybe looking at Yoimiya and you maybe don't really want to have the Engulfing Lightning from this other side, even if it drops, it can be great if you don't have Raiden, or you can use it from that Xiangling, or you can put it on some other characters. And especially if you do have Raiden, I would heavily suggest getting it for her so that you can put the catch on someone like Xiangling, and since the catch is free, you might as well do it anyways. So I think that's a great idea to really focus on with the Engulfing Lightning. I think this banner, as well as last banner, or the one that I guess is going currently on at this point, with the Navia and Ayanka, you couldn't really lose either one, especially if you had Navia. I think really just going after the banner in general is really, really good. And this one is even more so, considering that both of these weapons can be used for multiple different characters. Getting Thundering Pulse, once again, is not really a bad idea since it works on multiple different bow-specific characters and has great stats just in general with a higher attack than some other ones, like Rift was talking about using some other 4-stars with it. Pulling on this weapon banner should be heavily considered since both of these weapons don't really come at too big of a loss for you.
Well, we hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.